Charles stumbled out of the bar into the dark, wet street. The power outage had plunged the neighborhood into inky blackness, broken only by the occasional flicker of a lighter as the other patrons tried to find their way. His ears still rang from the disappointed groans when the bartender announced they were shutting early. The storm had come on fast and furious, howling winds and driving rain that rattled the windows of the old venue. But now there was only the steady patter of raindrops and the rolling rumble of thunder in the distance. The booze swirling in Charles's head made the street tilt dangerously. He blinked, trying to clear his blurry vision. His friends were supposed to split a rideshare back to their homes, but in the chaos of the blackout, he had lost track of them. Probably for the best. He was in a foul mood. He had been thinking about the last time he saw his ex. Anger simmered just beneath the surface, escaping in occasional bursts of profanity muttered under his breath. 2 months. It had been 2 months since he came home early from work to find Olive in bed with Steve, the instructor from her yoga class. 2 months since his world collapsed in an instant. The searing pain of that moment hadn't faded even a little since then. If anything, it grew hotter, angrier, more visceral with each sleepless night. Charles's feet carried him automatically towards the apartment they had shared, as if the last 2 months hadn't happened. Muscle memory from countless drunken walks home together after parties or bars. He felt a swell of bitterness towards Olive. This was her fault. Her selfish actions had stolen his happiness, his peace of mind, his sense of trust. He wished he had given in to the urge to shake her when he walked in on her and Steve practicing some very intricate yoga techniques. He wished he had yelled and raged at her so she understood the agony she had inflicted. But he hadn't. He had just stood there staring like a mute idiot. He left the apartment without saying a word. Later, he swallowed his feelings and moved out in cold, rigid silence. He avoided her texts and calls. His friends didn't dare mention her name when he was around. A knocking sound snapped him out of his furious thoughts. The sound had come from him. Charles stood with his fist raised against Olive's apartment door as the knock echoed in the pitch-black darkness. The realization crept over him like a shadow. He had walked all the way up to Olive's apartment and knocked on the door without realizing it. He swayed with drunkenness. What the hell was he doing? Charles turned to leave. The door swung open before he could turn away, and there she was, just a silhouette framed by the doorway. Her form was a dark cutout against the even darker apartment behind her, her features lost to him. She tried to shut the door on him, but Charles jammed it with his foot. At that moment, something snapped inside Charles. Words erupted from him, unbidden and raw, pouring out like blood from an unseen wound. His voice cut through the night air, a blade sharpened with hurt and anger. Everything he had thought but never said flowed out of him. He accused Olive of tearing their life apart, of betraying not just him but everything they had built together. He railed against her infidelity, his sentences punctuated by the distant thunder that rumbled in sympathy with his pain. Charles's tirade continued unabated for what felt like an eternity. His words were bullets, fired in the darkness of the night, aimed at a target he couldn't see. He did not need to see her face to know the impact. He felt it in his bones, in the tightness of his throat, in the hot sting of tears that refused to fall. He never waited for a reply. As abruptly as he started, Charles stopped. His chest heaved with exertion and emotion, spent from his verbal assault. Without another word, he turned on his heel and staggered away into the night, leaving Olive standing in the doorway to face the darkness alone. Charles woke with a start, his head pounding. Bright morning light streamed in through the blinds, assaulting his eyes and intensifying the jackhammer inside his skull. He groaned and rolled over, trying to escape the glare. As he buried his face in the pillow, memories of the previous night came flooding back. The power outage at the bar, stumbling drunkenly through dark streets, showing up at Olive's apartment in a rage and unloading months of pent-up hurt and anger. Charles cringed, his stomach twisting with shame. It was all still a blur, but he knew he had said things he could never take back. Things meant to wound her as deeply as she had wounded him. His phone buzzed with a new text notification. It was his friend Jake, asking if Charles had made it home okay. Charles sighed and typed back a summary of the sorry events after they had lost track of each other at the bar. Jake's reply was quick. "Dude, didn't you know? Olive moved interstate for work like a month ago." Charles stared blankly at the text from Jake. Olive doesn't live in town anymore? She moved interstate for work. How could he not have known? His mind reeled as he tried to make sense of this new information. After the breakup, Charles had cut off all contact. Of course, she would have moved on with her life without telling him. The realization hit Charles like a punch to the gut. If Olive didn't live there anymore, then whose apartment had he shown up at last night? Whose door had he pounded on in a drunken rage? Horror washed over him as he imagined some terrified stranger cowering in the darkness of the blackout, while Charles ranted like a madman and forcefully held the door open. His phone started vibrating as his other friends' texts rolled in. Great. Jake had already told them that Charles was a raving lunatic. His friends were having a good laugh over it. They were probably coming up with all kinds of hilarious theories about who lived there now. Maybe it was a nice old granny who almost had a heart attack when the crazy drunk guy started screaming at her door in the middle of the night. Charles groaned in embarrassment, then covered himself with the blanket and decided to go back to sleep. His friends would never let him live this one down, and he still hadn't confronted Olive about how he really felt about her betrayal. His head continued to pound in agony. "I'm never drinking again," he thought. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed creating it for you. Your support means everything to me. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. Until next time, take care and stay awesome.